think we are good.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jamie, and on the other side of our Zoom is, or StreamYard rather, is Siad, and together we are the little duo that could, Duo Triango. I was looking at the featured photos on my phone yesterday, and I realized that this is actually the 2-year anniversary of Siad and I being a real professional performing outfit. So what a 2 years it's been, and thank you to all who have supported us on our young infantile journey. We're super excited today to have Jessie and his collaborators with us to talk about a variety of projects, including Breathing and As the Song of the World. And to introduce everyone, I will turn it over to Siad.
So joining us today, we have Dr. Darrell Akon, who is a bass baritone who holds a doctoral degree, in 19th century opera history and performance, and a master's degree from the University of Cincinnati, the College Conservatory of Music. He graduated summa cum laude from Lawrence University with a bachelor's in music degree and a bachelor's of arts degree in government with a minor in ethnic studies. Dr. Akon's work on Black motivation, Black activism, and performative education has been presented throughout the country at venues such as the National Association for Ethnic Studies Conference, the University of Chicago, the Marcus Center in Milwaukee, and abroad in Europe and Africa. We will also be joined by Isaac Jean-Francois, who is a doctoral student in the joint degree program with African American Studies and American Studies at Yale University. Jean-Francois' research interests include Black studies, phenomenology, psychoanalysis, queer theory, and sound studies. His research on composer and performer Julius Eastman is featured in an issue of Current Musicology in an essay entitled Julius Eastman, The Sonority of Blackness Otherwise. Jean-Francois is committed to the intersections between academia and advocacy work and serves as a secretary of the board of directors of the Stonewall Community Foundation, which is based in New York City. And last but certainly not least, we have with us Jessie Cox, who is one of the world's most brazenly experimental composers. Swiss artist Jessie Cox makes music about the universe and our future in it. Through avant-garde, classical, experimental jazz, and sound art, he has devised his own strand of musical science fiction, one that asks where we go next. For the last decade, his music has been marked by its freeness. His embrace of otherness has led to a body of work described by the LA Times as, quote, some of the most experimental music, not just of the day, but of the season, end quote. Cox's music goes forward. When he describes it, he compares it to time travel and space exploration, likening the role of a composer to that of a rocket ship traversing undiscovered galaxies. So thank you everyone for being here, for joining us to discuss Jessie and all of you all's collaborations together. I think that we're going to first start out with Breathing. So Jessie, is there anything that you'd like to say before we share the piece?
Yes, thank you so much for having us, Siad and Jamie. I'm so excited for this conversation, also for Isaac and Darrell to meet and to discuss the work, which actually I'm writing wrote an essay with Isaac about Black breathing, and the piece is called Breathing that I made with Darrell, and actually they were created in the same time, and so they very much, of course, related in terms of content and what I was thinking through and working through at the time. And before we play the video, I would like to read quickly the program notes I wrote for that occasion of the premiere of this piece at the Long Beach Opera. In this piece, I decided to think about breathing, which increasingly has come to the fore of our attention. Of course, COVID is a question of breathing and a certain anxiety tied up with breathing. In this sense, to me, it is a question entangled with Black breathing. But breathing is also a way to talk across boundaries, because we all, human or not, have to be breathing, as Muhal Richard Abrams said. At the same time, I think that within this choice of breathing, despite the very possible violence that it can be succumbed to, is similar as how the Negro work songs escape captivation in an economy or any other shackles. In this sense, breathing is also about moving on, going on, despite. So we could play the piece now.
It was great. Thank you all so much for sharing that piece with us. I was wondering if you could, any of you, share the story kind of behind how that came to be.
Sure, I guess that's my cue. So, I mean, I think there are a couple of different ways by which we developed the piece. I guess the best impetus for it was the fact that the opera company that I worked for, Long Beach Opera, was putting together what we call the Songbook 2020, which was a collaboration with 20 composers, and each of whom was mentored by someone in the field, like someone of prominence, some folks famous. And the idea was to create 20 new works that all were commentary on what was happening right now. This is the middle of COVID. And naturally, as two Black folks, even though, I'm American, he's Swiss, but like still there's this collective Black experience, which has kind of been illuminated by the Black Lives Matter movement and these protests that we're seeing internationally, right? And so when Jessie and I were given the opportunity to work together, I think immediately that's kind of where our minds went. And I was just very pleased to hear about how deeply he was thinking about some of these concepts, because here I was, someone in LA, where I can like hear protests outside of my window, and I'm, in senior management at my company. And so like my days are quite packed. Like I was not really going out to a lot of the protests. And I'm just like, am I really doing everything that I want to do to make a statement about what's happening around me, as someone who is so aligned with the cause, with, and being as radical about it as necessary. And yet I feel that sometimes, depending on where you are in life, what you're doing, you can not be given the same outlet as other folks. And so, my outlet is supposed to be art. And so it was a very welcome collaboration in this idea of interrogating breathing, and what does breathing mean, both from the standpoint of like being a human being during a pandemic, but what does breathing mean during a time where we're experiencing, myriad violence upon Black bodies, right? Like over and over and over across decades and decades. And it means something else. And so that's kind of how the piece started. I think there are a lot of different developmental elements that were really awesome with Jessie. I remember Zoom calls and figuring out certain references that he was making in the piece, talking about range and tessitura, which are, terminology around the vocalism that you heard, which, I'm a scholar, as you heard, of 19th century opera. So I'm used to like the traditional, here are the harmonies, this is what you do, here's the melody, like, antecedent, consequent. But I'm also someone who has done a lot in contemporary music and interpretation in that space. And so to be able to do so with Jessie was really wonderful.
So some of that, dare I say, improvised at all? Yeah. Or was it the pitch is this, or else sing this, or else?
Yeah, well, it's very fascinating actually, because everything is on the score. But of course, not everything, because the amount of intensity that Durrell put into it, and also it's very interesting. We met, and there is this beginning part, right, where you have barely singing, barely voice, sort of something in between and everything, right? And I remember we had the conversation about, you used to do Baraka's poetry.
I still do.
So, okay, I didn't know that. So when we talked about that, and I think to me it was really much that kind of the way that it's interpreted, the notation, the way it's interpreted, and that's always important in my work. The notation is not there is no one way to understand it. You can read it in many different ways, and I think one thing that Durrell was pointing to is this global experience, right? The way that I traveled in my life, the way that I work with people from different places in the world. To me, part of that is being able to have a language that you can share, that is not limiting somebody in what they are or can do or want to be or want to do, and so forth, just because of some page, but actually allowing the page, the notes on the page, to be a vehicle for allowing the space to meet each other, the space to find a new common language together. Yeah. So that's how I think about this improvisation composing thing. So it's one thing, right? It's one big practice. Yeah.
If I could jump in here, it really was an incredible work, especially thinking alongside Jessie and my ongoing writing together around the question of breathing. But Darrell, I was taken by your range and my ear listening to Julius Eastman and his vocal work and composition. What I heard was not only a breathing, but also a deep calling upon of the interior, a lowness in the chest. And so I wonder if you could talk more. You mentioned it about this call for range. If you could talk more about the scene of range that you are enacting in your practice, not as just to make a song, but to make an opera. I mean, this is an operatic work. Think about that range and how that also connects to your breath. I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing I would say is I just love, Jessie, that you brought the baraka up, because when I present his poetry, or perform his poetry, I should say, which feels more accurate, I often precede my performance with this quotation by Medaduewa Jones, in which, I'm not going to get it, perfectly, but it's basically saying that there's another element of his poetics that emerges when you hear the performance that is not captured through a one-dimensional reading on the page. And I think the similar thing is true for breathing and presumably for the rest of your work as well. And I think, to Isaac's point, that really has to do with the range, because it becomes not just about, okay, now I'm singing a C, now I'm singing a low E flat, it's just like, also, what is the range of intensity? What is the range of emotion? What is the range of time, right? Like, when am I Darrell right now in LA 2021? And when am I like pulling the pain and trauma of my ancestors from hundreds of years ago, who presumably also were thinking about, can I just breathe? Like, is this so inherent to our experience that that becomes one of the questions we ask ourselves. And so, yeah, I think I totally hear you, Isaac, and that there is a range in so many different regards. And I think even in that short bit of time, that's why it feels substantive. Like you're getting so much, and even a short period of time, because I think we're playing within so many different spaces through range, through intensity, through sound, through improvisation. Yeah, I mean, and improvisation, I will say, actually, like the structure of the piece, like the pitch arcs and all of that stuff is written, and it may sound improvisatory, but Jessie, a lot of that is from Jessie's hand, right? And there's some improvisation in terms of like what syllable am I going to use, which consonant am I going to throw in front of this scat, but I think we got to a place where the piece as it exists on the page was quite similar to what I ended up recording.
I'm wondering, I'm not an expert in 19th century opera, but I'm imagining that the challenges that you all are presented with in staging this production are very different than what you might be presented with in staging Traviata or something like that. So I'm curious how you all approached the visual aspect of creating this opera for us.
Sure. Jessie, do you want to start there, or I'm happy to. If you...
Maybe you speak on it, because actually I wasn't there.
Right. But we talked
for most of it.
True.
I mean, there are some parts where you see me, and that's actually from my TV show Space Travel from Home, which I created during the pandemic in my apartment in New York in the lockdown. But the other parts were shot in LA, and so I say the real might know more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I will say it's hard to make a like side by side comparison between this and 19th century opera, because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so even moving into this digital space alone was a departure from your usual production process. But for sure. I mean, for sure, this was something that felt different. The interpretation felt different. And part of it is because there's a certain ownership, both because I'm a Black person, expressing something that feels Black, but also because, as is often the case with new contemporary music, if you have an opportunity to work with the composer, to work with the librettist, and especially if they're making changes or considering you specifically for a role or for a piece, then there's also another element of ownership. It's just like, this was made for me, or like, it's like this, there's not, I can't do this wrong because I am like the point of reference. And so that was helpful. I mean, I think ideally, even in a like 19th century production, 18th century production, one would reach at least some sense of ownership to reach that level. But that's definitely a very clear difference between when you're dealing with like traditional canonical works versus something that's more contemporary, for which you've workshopped, parts of it or all of it with the composer, with the creative team. But in terms of the staging, I mean, it didn't feel like staging as much as it felt like, here is our idea. Here are some areas of LA that makes sense to express that idea. And we had conversations with Jessie about, this is what this would mean, this is how this would work. And we kind of came to terms with, this is going to get at what the piece is looking to express. And we did it. And then I must say that Kenny, the guy who handled the editing, there's also a bit of his artistry in there, a lot of his artistry in the editing, which is a huge part of video, right? So props to him. Kenny Yates is his name here in LA.
If we might sit with that question of ownership for a second, I think one of the most disturbingly brilliant parts of the recording is you positioned at LACMA under the rock, breath, which, as we all know, in our moment, for Black folks, has always been a contested site under rocks, underweight. And so I wonder, Darrell, if you could speak about that ownership. This piece was made for me. I have a sense of ownership over it, and though at the same time, Black breath is continually indeterminate in our present, and how you navigated that tension.
Oh yeah, I mean, I really love that question, because it's interesting. This thing happens in opera a lot, and I'm talking about this so frequently because as Jessie knows, I'm involved in what I call a racial awakening right now in opera, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Black Opera Alliance, and just really am unrelentless about the activism happening in opera right now. And part of the inequity that exists in opera is who has license to interpret pieces and be believed in those pieces. One of the main arguments, the refrain we hear is oh, well, audiences won't believe, a Black Violetta or a fat, Desdemona, those are the conversations we're having. And yet all of these people have real life experiences that parallel those of the people on stage. And so if we're trying to reflect human experience, then yes, people will believe it if you do your job as an artist, right? But one thing that happens so frequently is I'll stick with Black, but this happens in many other marginalized experiences as well, is that there can be a certain element of like, I have to first pretend to be a white person so I can have a sense of connection with the audience, and then I can interpret the character. Whereas with this, it's almost the other way around. It's just like, because I have ownership of the piece, because I have freedom of knowing that, you know, this composer, the way he wants his piece interpreted, I've already gotten his blessing that I am doing it. You know, now I have more ownership of the artistic interpretation, right? And so like that space actually expands because I don't have to go through that like intermediary stop of like, how will a predominantly white audience receive this? It's just like, no, this piece is our piece, right? And here's the interpretation. And so everything that I bring out of my own personal experience as a Black person, everything I bring out of what I feel is a collective experience of a lot of marginalized people, and in terms of feeling downtrodden by systems, you know, I was able to use artistic flexibility and how I expressed that, how I brought that into the space, which felt ironically liberating, you know, even in a piece kind of about struggling with liberation. Although I love Jessie's take, which is primarily his take that like there is a liberation at the end of the piece, because that's not a place I originally went with it. And I just love that we had that conversation, and you challenged us to think about the piece as actually being optimistic in the end.
I really love this answer. I also have an answer to the same question, or a thought that I have to mention, which is that when I was writing the piece, you know, I was looking at a lot of Gerald's works and his bio and so forth. So I knew he was what he termed a Blacktivist, and he also, you know, what he sung and how he sung. So I was listening to the Deep River that Darrell sung, and so I was listening and imagining the piece, but when I was writing the piece, I was writing by myself, right, on a piece of paper, with the piece of paper. And one question that I had in my mind, right, is, since the whole point is to think about escaping the economizability of Black life or Black breath through breathing, I had to ask myself the question, you know, I was very careful, let me say it like that, of asking of Darrell to put all of that in the piece. So was really beautiful when Darrell started taking the piece to be his own, because then it becomes a collaboration and not anymore, you know, me trying to impose on somebody to do something to then have some sort of product. But it became a process that we did together. And to me, that's very important always with music, and especially with something like opera, which to me comes also from sort of thinking music as ritual, as it being a process that can sort of transform the people involved, and, you know, not be focused on the work, you know, the work as in the work in clothes, not work as in working, which is the part, I guess, that I like. So that's, to me, also part of the question, right? Because if we really want to ask this question, we also have to ask this difficult question too, I think. And this ending, that it is positive, I guess, in the sense that it's positive that we see or hear something in breathing, I think here, or for us, which allowed us to think a way of moving on, as I said in the program once, of being together and doing something incredible that we will feel as that, you know, as something that changed us and our life, and that is for us incredible. No matter what is the situation, doesn't matter if I'm stuck in my apartment in Brooklyn for months and I can't breathe. Doesn't matter that I'm afraid to breathe when I walk in certain neighborhoods, you know. or just because I don't have a mask or something like that. So that despite of that, we keep breathing in. That is somehow to me a really powerful act, and yeah. So this is, I guess, the positive, to me, that it is nonetheless we keep breathing.
And it's an environmental kind of insistence as well. The trees are also in precarious positions with the devastating forest fires. And so there you are in the space of moving on, leaving us with the scene of the trees, which I think is really magical, Jessie, could you say more about this operatic transformation? The transformation of characters and performers through the performance, because this is not your first go at the form. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so as the Song of a World, which we will show later, a teaser from the film that's going to be made, this opera that I created and premiered around the time when I was writing this piece with Durrell. To me, part of opera is ritual. And I mean, it's funny, but Wagner said the same thing, right? And Anthony Braxton also points to how that's the most important to him. And I have to say, for me, it was always like that. All music was ritual. And this opera, for example, as a Song of a World, I created, like, for example, if you just look into this screen right now, like in the screen of where I am in, my whole room is changed by that piece. This mask has changed its appearance. This stuff is from the opera. The way the drums is set up is because the opera happened, because the piece happened. I could say same thing actually with Space Travel from Home or with Breathing. There's always this changing myself that I'm trying to do with the music. Changing not for the sake of just, I don't know, not for the sake of going somewhere specific, but more like just breathing, It's like, if you don't keep breathing, you're gonna get stuck. So when you get stuck, it's finished. And that's basically, I know it sounds really simplistic, but that's how I see, I guess, the ritual aspect. And so I create a piece of music that goes way beyond just a couple of sounds, but it's the interaction with the performer. It's the objects that are made in, for, and through the performance. It's the sounds that resonate in other people, like words, you remember them. It somehow affects you, and keeps you going, keeps me going when I hear it. And then the performance moment is this moment where months and months and months and maybe years of work, suddenly something happens with years of work or a lot of energy that's put in, and then something happens there because it's so much energy that you put in yourself. I don't know how to formulate myself well for this question.
Yeah, so do you want to introduce as a Song of a World, and then we can share the teaser? We're going to talk about the film that's going to be made about it and everything.
Yeah, why not? Let's do that. So in October last year, we premiered this piece as a Song of a World, which is an opera for free jazz musicians, experimental, classical, avant-garde, everything, etc., etc. So a huge amalgamation of different things, which basically is to say I was trying to find a way to make my language solidify to the next point, I guess we could say, because that's who I am, as you heard in the bio. So the piece involved a numerous staging and costumes and sound and electronics, numerous things, and different musicians from New York, and was planned to be premiered live, of course. When the pandemic happened, I decided I would nonetheless continue because I couldn't let the chance get away from me, firstly, to work with these incredible people. And secondly, I felt I had put too much work into this piece for it not to exist. And I also thought it could work telematically. So I decided to do it in my own home. I was basically the main actor, as in the drum set playing is kind of the main storyline. And so I basically set up the stage here in my room, and we performed it telematically. I always, since the beginning when I started writing the piece, wanted the piece to be thought of not necessarily like only opera, but like something like a opera film. So from the beginning, I was talking to Adrien Tillman about possibly filming it and then making a film out of the piece. And I was inspired, by for example, Milford Graves' Full Monty's, that film, or Sonora Orchestra's Basis the Place. These films where music was sort of the main protagonist. And I was really taken by that idea. So it was always a plan to make a film from it. Of course, it happened to be telematically, so he made a film out of, or is making now a film out of that, and I can't wait to show you this teaser that I received today from Adrien, and so yesterday for the first time. So please enjoy. Hey, Beto. Hey.
Okay, hey, there we go.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah. So we're using Jam Kazam at 1 o'clock. Is that the idea?
Oh, I can turn it on as soon as we want to. I'll probably turn it on soon.
And then I just have a couple questions about what do the three dots mean? And
sorry, that just means continue with S. So tone loss.
oh.
Essence, meaning, everything, nothing that they are, meaning and everything, nothing that they are or aren't. This notation is not musical notation, is notation. Black hole, a region in space having a gravitational field so intense, no matter what vibrations can escape. A place where people disappear without trace.
Thank you. that was beautiful, and I am looking forward to seeing the rest of the movie to go along with the rest of the opera. I'm super curious about this cyborg clarinet and like your little inventions with technology and things like that. So, can you speak about like creating those things and then also like asking someone to do that?
Yeah, so I'm also really stoked about this film. Absolutely can't wait to see the rest, or well, when it's finished, to see that whole film. The cyborg clarinet. So the cyborg clarinet started, the building of that instrument started, I think, 2017. So quite some time before the piece. And it was basically me and Vasco Dukovsky just meeting a couple of times every other month or so. And I was taking measurements, 3D printing at the Columbia University, and trying to insert a loudspeaker inside the clarinet. That was basically the goal. So I was 3D printing some adapter that would be able to put that in to the instrument. So it's absolutely unbelievably, incredibly finicky. I think that's kind of the word to make an instrument. Like less than, what was it? Less than a millimeter. Let's say something like that. If you have less than a millimeter off, the whole pressure changes and you get no sound. So months and months, we just worked and worked and worked, tried to print, bring it to Vasco, try to fit it in, didn't fit. Back on the subway, back to my place, back uptown, back to my place, back to Vasco. And after many months, we got some squeaks. It was the most amazing feeling in my life when I heard those squeaks. And I think that was part of the creation of this piece afterwards, because part of the story in the piece is the making of an instrument, finding a sound through that instrument, and then the disappearing of that. Because actually what happened is we got a squeak, I filed a little bit, thought we would get more sound, and it disappeared, and we had to restart. So, but what was left was the memory of the sound and our hope for sound, or I don't know if you even want to call it hope, because we knew sound was possible at that moment. So we didn't give up at that point, and it was giving us some energy to pursue and try to find the sound. So after that, Vascos had to leave the country, and Yuma Uesaka was the next person with whom I worked. And at that point, it actually already was basically finished. So me and Yuma were just trying to explore different sounds and see what worked. Certain sounds blend very well and create this otherworldly kind of instrument, and others, they're not really interesting. So we did all these experiments trying to find the right sounds. And at the same time, Yuma had to relearn the clarinet, because it changes the tuning, because it changes the length of the pipe. But on top of that, you can make new sounds, because the sounds, since the speaker is in the instrument, it interferes with what you play. So you can create new sounds you can play one note, and depending on what is played in the electronics, it will be a completely different result. So yeah, so that was the experience. It was quite something, quite a challenge.
And you were saying it was always your intention from the beginning to have a film made about this piece?
Yeah, exactly. To have it be sort of like the performance is basically a secret movie. What do you call it? A movie where you shoot the movie.
Behind scenes, or
like where you go and shoot the movie. So in secret, for me, it was a movie set. That's it. Thank you. A secret movie set. I didn't tell anyone, so except the filmmaker. So that was kind of my plan. We'll make it a secret movie set. So the whole piece was written with that in mind. I filmed myself composing too, so there might be some footage of that. That would be part of the film. Yeah.
I'm interested, if I can, to know about the libretto. Like, I heard you talking a bit about a black hole, but then there sound like there was some philosophical stuff about art and music making. What is the libretto, and how much text is there in this piece?
Yeah, so my goal was basically I kind of write something like sound poetry or something like that in my spare time for fun. I'm just obsessed with the sound of words, and sometimes I get things to flow through me in terms of words instead of just sound. So I write it down or I record it. And for this piece, I wanted to continue this practice because it was important to me to return to that practice, because I stopped for a long time because I felt like I'm trying to do poetry, but maybe I don't know how to do poetry. But then I realized it wasn't poetry. I was doing something a little different. And for the libretto, then I decided I would really write some poems. And at the same time, I would, as I was also recording myself, like with the camera, I was also going to record the process of writing the piece in form of some type of poetic journal. So I had this black journal and I wrote in it about every other week or every week, depending on the time period of composing, like how much I was composing. I wrote more if I composed more, I wrote less if I composed less. And so I had a bunch of writing from that, and I just used pages from that basically as libretto. And the Black Hole poem, that's a poem that I wrote, which I don't remember by heart, but I can share it with you sometime.
Yeah, in terms of the music, over the past year, a lot of people talk about how people feel like music performed over Zoom or something is less than live music or music made in person. I guess I would wonder, what do you feel like you and the opera gained from doing it over Zoom that added to the production?
Mm-hmm. So firstly, for the movie, it's actually really fascinating because we have this very strange, camera footage, right? Which is the Zoom, the individual people at home, and that makes it even more so a sort of fictional documentary, which I anyway was attempting to do, right, by documenting what the process was like. But in terms of the music also, it allowed us as a group actually to access this sort of time sense. And also, especially for me as a composer, I started understanding my ensemble time sense more. Because what was happening is that you would get different amounts of delay between different musicians, and that would change over time, of course. So player A to player B has a delay of 100 milliseconds in the first moment of the piece, and in the next moment their delay is larger, and so player B is closer to player C, right? So this variability of relation between different players is exactly actually how I wrote the score. The score has no conductor in mind. It has only sort of in mind a sort of overall harmony or gesture, timbre or gesture or texture quality, but then it has these related gestures. So there's music, suddenly something happens here, and you need to play this right before this person is playing this, because this is a phrase. And so that, of course, to gain that access to understanding of time, I think telematic helped us a lot. And then the second part that I think also was great, which is that I believe that one aspect of this piece for me that's important is the imagination of the listener. So you have to actively imagine things when you watch it. And to me, the sort of low res, weird camera footage approach makes me have to do that even more. And especially, since it's in somebody's home, like for example, you saw that hallway. A lot of people mentioned how it's horror. It reminds them of a horror film or a horror game, right? But it's actually my apartment. So there is this really strangeness to this uncanniness that I was trying to get out of in the pieces in general, and I think it kind of was helping that. Yeah.
Do you think, just out of curiosity, do you think that even moving forward, you would continue to use Zoom or something similar as like a compositional device or like a performance structure in your future pieces?
I have no idea. I think something. I mean, this year has been this past year has been quite interesting for me because I was able to really experiment with the medium within which the space within which my music happens, and I've done many different things. And what I realized already writing this piece before the pandemic is that to create a piece like this, I need to rethink the space within which it is happening. So it wouldn't work, even if this was live, I would have had all these threads behind me, like not my hair, but on the wall, spanning across the room to create a completely different sense of space. And that is actually part of the piece because I run around and walk around and touch the strings and ring the bells, and they're attached to the drums, and the drums is distributed in space. And at the end, it's one drum set. And then I can touch them and I can make sounds that are far away with the bells that are attached to these threads, which makes me be able to do sort of spatialized. But to me, that was my attempt, I think, in completely reimagining the space within which my music was happening, and also to transform the space during the performance. And again, this is, I think, part of why I say space travel, because I don't only want to make new spaces or change spaces or rethink what spaces mean and so forth, but I also want to have that moment of migration, the moment where something changes what the space looks like, the coordinates of the world, and keep doing that, like traveling.
Does that instrument still exist? And do you plan to use it again?
Yes, this was the perfect question. Because actually, yes, so I almost forgot to mention that the instrument is going to be part of a new sort of, not an opera, I call it a monodrama. And it's going to be around maybe an hour-long piece with text by an author and just solo cyborg clarinet. And of course, it will be about space travel.
And so is the text going to be sung by someone or spoken?
Oh, that's a great question. I was thinking, my dream is that it will be spoken by somebody who is a cyborg and can terraform themselves. That's the word. Transmutate themselves, transmorphize themselves. So basically, the voice sounding like it will be from a being of different kind in different moments, which I started that in my issue project piece called The Sound of Listening with my friend Alan Dak Chan, who raps. And in that piece, they are a cyborg rapper. And so transforming the voice and the space through the voice and through the space, the voice. And so that part I would like to continue. Yeah. Maybe you should actually speak it, like in Baraka style.
I can't mutate into a cyborg, unfortunately, but
Well, we will figure that out with the electronics. Yeah, I'm also curious, Isaac, because you were at the performance of this piece, and you were also part of it by being the moderator for the Q&A. Your response to the seeing this teaser and your experience of being part of that whole.
No, absolutely. I'm super excited, and I also love all of the kind of digital manipulation, glitchy things that are happening too, which further put the sound and the images in indeterminate spaces. I guess I'm just thinking more broadly and bringing breathing into the scene of the film. It's when we leave your work, we know that no instrument is the same, or maybe no instrument will be the same after you get to it. So I'm just thinking through this kind of indeterminacy of the given or the authorized set of instruments. You know, we have, and also the sort of preferred arrangement of instruments in different genres of music. You know, in the piece that we saw, we have the steel drum in an aria. You know, it's we have dreads in the kind of making of the space of a performance. It's doing something that is deeply unsettling because we aren't used to that, and I think that in and of itself takes us to another world. The other thing that I will say is that, you know, it's a song of a world, and we talked about this in another instance, not the world, or, you know, explicitly XYZ world, and it's not the piece that we, you know, it's not the breath, you know, it's breathing. Again, the naming of these places are kind of unfixed, which I think continues to be part of the terror and beauty, after Saidiya Hartman, of Black life. This unfixity that allows for flight, but also a sense of becoming lost, which opens the visuals in Durrell's performance of breathing.
Yeah, that's right. The steel drum in the aria. I'm pretty sure I thought about that, but now I forgot, and that's fascinating. Yeah, I think that's, to me, part of why we do what we do, in my opinion, as artists, is to, what is the point of us? And to me, is to allow us to keep breathing, basically, right? Because without that, well, things become pretty bland and stale, so gotta spice it up, you know. Get something in the pot, some chilies in there. That's basically it.
Well, wonderful, and thank you all so much for joining us here. To Jessie for, you know, agreeing to be on our show, and to your collaborators for accepting this invitation. We really, really appreciate it, and I'm so glad that we were able to talk and hear more about, you know, all of the really wonderful things that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Siad and Jamie, for having us, and the Reverend Isaac for joining, and everyone else who was part of the works. I also want to say thank you, and I hope, and thank you for having us on this wonderful show, because I've been enjoying seeing those interviews, and I hope it keeps going for a long time and it keeps inspiring people. Thank you.
We do too. So our next show is going to be our last one of this season, which will be in 2 weeks on June 27th, featuring one of my best friends, improv artist, comedian Val Hill. And that'll be same time, 2 p.m. CBT, 3 p.m. EST, or EDT, and you can translate from there. So we appreciate you all, and we will see you back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.